Okay, so a couple weeks ago I asked all of you to send over your sprites with the promise that I would then animate them in a future video. And so thank you to those who did send over a sprite, and for those of you who didn't see the post then, I'd still be interested to see what you guys have, because I might still do something with them in the future, right? The door's not closed. But for this video I'm going to be working with this one sprite sent in by, let me just get their name again, Minh. And so thank you to Minh for sending in their sprite. Theirs is going to be the one that we're working with today. Now what did they send in? That's a good question. They sent in a Yasuo Sprite. It's a champion from League of Legends. By champion I mean character. Now one of the things that drew me to this sprite in particular was the fact that Yasuo was one of the first things I animated. Right, back in the early days, many yonks and years ago, and so I thought it would be interesting to do a bit of a comparison. So that's what we're doing, and that's what I've done. I've already done it. This is me recording over me doing it. So yeah, let's get started. Here's the sprite, as we've already seen. Now they sent in a static version of it with this sort of, like a rough version, I guess, of what they're looking for. Now based on the little swooshy animation they've already added, my assumption is that they were trying to do his Q animation, like the little pokey thing, which is also the same thing I did many years ago, funnily enough. And so the goal of this animation was to try and recreate that Q animation. The first things first, before I even started animating anything, I went in and I tried to simplify the sprite. I tried to get rid of quite a few of the details, which I hope Minh doesn't mind, and the purpose of that is so that I don't have to spend a ridiculous amount of time animating this. Now I've talked about this topic in another video a little while ago, but to sort of summarize the whole point of the video, the point is that it takes long, right, to animate details. When we have all these little pixely specks, where the hair has all these precise details, it just adds way too much to the animation time. And if I didn't remove those details, then, well, it just wouldn't be finished. I wouldn't put in the effort, I wouldn't be able to. And so the thing I ended up doing was heavily simplifying things, getting rid of certain bits of shading, sort of making the shapes a bit rounder, minimizing the colors, right? I'm trying to make this easy for me. So that was the first point of action. Let's just simplify it. Moving on from that, the next thing was to get the key poses in order. Now for this animation, we only really need 3 different poses. There's the initial pose where he's just kind of standing there. There's the second one where he pulls out the sword, and then there's the last one where he's then pushing forward, thrusting the sword outwards, okay? And so we only have 3 to deal with, luckily. So it's nothing too complicated. Now in my experience, drawing the keyframes, drawing those key poses is usually the hardest bit. That's just for me personally. Once I've actually gotten past the point where those key poses are in order and all I have to do is, fill in the frames, add the in-betweens, that bit's okay. Once you've gotten to the point where those core blocks are in place, right, those key frames, then everything else is kind of simple. That's the fun part. But yeah, as you might tell, I kind of struggled with this bit here. So we've got the first resting pose, right? The idle, nothing's happening. Then we've got the anticipation pose where he's pulling back and it's like, look, something's about to happen. And then the third frame where the sword goes forward, he's doing the damage even though there's nothing there. He's kind of just stabbing thin air. And then he goes back to his normal pose, right? It's a loop. And so this is how things started to look once we had those key poses in place. Now the next part, one of my favourite parts, was starting to add in the smears. Okay, when you're doing quick movements, you kind of need to make up for it by adding these little smear frames, these motion blurs. So for instance, I would start adding it to the hand. As the hand's coming up, we add a little smear frame. As the sword's being pulled back, we add a little smear frame, or we add a smear to the frame. It's the same frame, it's all the same frame. And we're just covering it in a bunch of smears. And in doing so, things feel a little bit smoother, a little less choppy. Now while I did end up removing the little effect that Minh sent in, it was a useful guide. I did end up replacing it with something of my own, but I do think it was useful. Here I'm adding a bit of overshoot. So while he's transitioning from his idle pose to this anticipation pose, I've just made him bubble up for a single frame, just go beyond the settling point. So it's like he's going up and then down, goes from idle just past the anticipation pose and then settles in, and that just gives it a bit more bounce, a bit more fluidity. It's a stylistic choice, right? Okay, here I'm just moving the hand back a bit, working on those anticipation frames. So as I said earlier, we want to make that hand the sort of center of attention at this point. So we're trying to exaggerate it. We're pulling it back. We're charging up the attack, right? And the way we're charging it is through the hand. So very simple, just pulling it back, kind of like a pool stick, snooker stick, a cue, I think it's called, yeah, a pool cue. That's sort of how I visualized it. And not only are we pulling the hand back, but we're also making it just a little bit bigger. Not too much, just a little bit, but just enough to make it go, whoa, something's happening over there. Something's charging up, and that just gives the attack a bit more energy. I was then trying to make the transition, the end transition, right, back to the original pose, look a bit nicer. And to do that, just use the good old recipe of, you know, the things I've already explained in this video. Some curves, some arcs, and some overshooting. That's quite a solid, reliable recipe for making something feel nicer, is to take whatever frame you're about to go to, take whatever pose you're trying to transition to, go to the pose, and then just push a bit further beyond it. So in this case, the sword is going from this stabbed out position, where it's reaching out, and it's going back to this more settled, down by the ground position. But rather than just making it go to that position and then stopping, we'll go to the position and then we'll go beyond it. We'll just lift it up a bit more, we'll continue with the angle that it was already going in, and then we'll come back down. It's like a swing. Now back to the attack pose. To give it a bit more punch, I sort of gyrate his body forward, or forwards and backwards. So it goes forward to the extreme, then it goes back to the extreme, and then forward a little bit, and then back to this more settled position. So it's kind of like a screen shake, but within his body, I guess. Then it came time to animating his cape, tunic, shirt. I'm not quite sure what that piece of clothing is. Whatever the thing is on his torso is. Kind of just wanted to make it flap in the wind when he stabs the sword forward. Because when it flaps in the wind, it's emphasizing the speed of the motion. Because when you go quickly, if you have some loose piece of clothing on you, it's going to react. It's going to flow in the wind. So we wanted to make sure to add that bit just to emphasize the speed that he's stabbing. A similar situation with the hair. Naturally, hair reacts to the wind, right? When you're moving around, it's going to flop around. Unless you've got this super strong gel, it's going to move, it's going to flop around, and in doing so, it kind of gives it a bit more character. And like the piece of clothing and the belt, it's helping to emphasize the movement. When the hair's reacting to the way he's moving, it's like, oh look, he's moving in this way. You can tell based on how his hair's moving and how everything's moving. So I did that. For me, animating hair is really like there's a lot of randomness to the process. It's just kind of taking the brush and drawing near where it was before, but not exactly where it was before, and that just makes it seem flowy. You know, the point is that the movement is supposed to be somewhat random, because hair is quite frankly sensitive to the wind. The wind's going to make it move in all these kind of jumbly ways, and so you don't need to be too specific. Well, I don't like to be. Getting near the end here. We're almost there, people. Another thing I added to the stab pose was a bit of brightness, just to the first 2 frames, so that it almost flashes as he stabs, which I think helps add to the power of things. It was also at this point that I started to rework the little white dust animations, the wind animations which Minh originally animated. I also thought it would be cool to add a bit of red in there, right? Make this little red. It's kind of like a flame. It's not a flame, but it looks like a flame. I think that gives it a bit more character. It's just one of those arbitrary effects which it's not really anything, but. And well, that's about it. And so that was the last bit I added. And so here's the final thing. It's a very simple animation, but it was nice to redo something which I did a few years ago. So yeah. Thank you, Minh, for sending in the sprite, as well as to all the other people who sent in their sprites. I'll probably go through more of them in the future. At the same time, if anyone does want to send in their sprites as well, that would also be cool. If I'm interested, I might animate them as well. Anyways, thank you for watching and listening to me ramble. I'm starting to think that I need a better ending to these videos. All of these other guys have got some snappy saying, right? I don't know what they say. I'll have to do some research. Or how about we ask some good old AI? Thanks for tuning in and joining the Noodle community. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest content, on my latest content. And always remember, your support is what keeps me going. Until next time, stay inspired and keep chasing your dreams. Catch you in the next video.